So is the screen is up?
Yes.
All right. So hi everyone. Once again, my name is Nan Hu. Currently back right now here in China. So it is late, early like 10:22 at night. It's a good timing. I was joking with Nick that the kids is going to bed, so it's a good time for do some research. So my talk here is, today is about some of my recent work which I've been working on, namely as architect material. So we use some of those so-called, programmable architect material to design adaptive structures to achieve the enhanced resilience. So my background, connect with biomimetics is already back to my graduate school way back, probably back 10 years ago, when I have my focus on bridge engineering. So what's going on here? Yeah. So my early work, I have a lot of basically I'm a structural engineer by training actually. So working on a bridge engineering in particular. So my early work was really focusing on how that we can, harnessing interesting structure forms in nature to help us to design new bridges. So and then my research switched a little bit toward mechanics when I started my graduate school in Michigan, which we're working on a lot of buckling and post-buckling problem, snap through buckling. So this actually have a lot of I learned a lot of in nature, because it's a buckling the phenomenon is one of those instability that you can find in nature, winkling, snapping, all kind of things. So I'm really interested about that. And then when I did my postdoc at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, so my focus actually switched even more toward material science and biomedical engineering, which I still play some structures, but I start to putting those instability or buckling to design some biomedical devices uh, as a multidiscipline group. So with that being said, because that's a really a a little bit over all over the place. But my current focus after I become a faculty at Ohio State University in Columbus, I start to engage with this committee within EMI. So they have this architecture materials, which right now a group of researchers within mechanics, material science, mechanical engineering, also civil engineering, started looking how that we can play with material architectures to tailor the property of the materials. And you may think you may heard about negative Poisson's ratios, negative stiffness, all kind of things. So this is a very new committee actually back in about 2 years ago, so within EMI. And so but actually this is not a very new idea. But if you look into this figure here, in the horizontal axis is basically the size scales, and on the vertical axis is the structural or material efficiency over the time. So you can see on the left, the material, back to the early natural forms, they have the foam, right? They have a lot of natural form with this random, cellular shape. And then in the modern form, you may heard about this macro lattice. They're really lightweight and highly efficient. So this is on the material side. On the structure side, in the early age, we design a lot of very, bold materials, entirely solid. Moving on to, this very good example of Eiffel Tower, have a lot of hierarchical structural forms, which is pretty efficient. So, because we have additive manufacturing in the, probably last 5-10 years, people start to think about how that we can use this, advanced technology, also think about the machine learning, all the things to design more efficient structures, right? And so this is how this field was born. So if you look into the structural design, in the past, so basically when we think about changing the material properties, their stiffness. We basically only vary their microstructures or their, you know, the wear protections. So now a group of new engineering materials, we can basically tailor their mechanical or physical properties only by their structural features. So all those examples down there is some of the recent work, some of them published in the very high profile journals like Science and Natures. They're looking to this, you see a lot of structural features within all those examples. But the common feature within those materials is actually there's either a buckling or bending or folding of the material forms, which have a lot of similarity in a lot of in a natural structures or forms. So I'm going to talk about later in my talk. So my group actually is, I was mentioned earlier, that focusing on design and fabricate and adaptive structures that have the so-called programmable deformations or tailorable properties, so that we can achieve, resilience, not just in the architectural scales, but also, through the collaboration. I'm also working on some of the, the macro nanoscale structures. So there's some of the example here that we're working on, how to design, the energy absorption systems, adaptive structures, crawling robots, through those, structural designs. So one of the work that we really focused on early, back to the early days, we're looking to these structural form in nature. And they have a lot of cellular materials. Some of you may know this early work back to 80s, which done by Professor Gibson at MIT. They started to look into develop the mechanical, a theoretical approach to analysis those open cell forms. And then more recently, because of this 3D printing and a lot of the techniques, we'll be able to make a lot of those cellular materials or structures with tailorable properties. So this is also a very recent work published earlier this year in April, which done by the Professor Eisenberg in Harvard. They start to look into this, structural form at, sponge, to see how that they can borrow this idea to design this, very simple cellular lattice, which collaborated with mechanical engineering professor Katia Bertoli. So they on the right hand side, you can see there are a lot of structural forms, the bio-inspired structural forms, and they can actually have better energy absorption or mechanical property in general compared to regular structural forms by intuitions. So in our lab, we early, like about 2 years ago, we started looking to some of the moving form like the slime mold. We started to play with that, and then also using some simulation or algorithm to generate some of the forms. And then we use some general experimental approach and the numerical modeling to design a lot of those structural forms to see how that we can achieve better performance of the material. And you can see through those bio-inspired forms, they have all kind of the deformations, which we will be able to tailor them only by their structural forms within this like small domain, right? So, and then more recently, we started using machine learning to think about how that we can cover the majority of the structural form, because this is the possibilities the design domain is too large. We cannot just like simply borrow some of the form in nature, or even come up through the intuitions. So we use some of the machine learning forms to help us to generate more structural forms, predict them more efficiently. And this is one of the early, the recent work I published last year. Lastly, I want to show one of our recent work, try to just working on adaptive structure. This is not like bio-inspired stuff, but I want to show you because it's some of the things that we think about this, in general, this adaptive structure, probably bio-inspired later. So you can see here, we built a small, about this 100 by 100 millimeter kind of structures, and they can sort of self-adaptive by, we'll see the water coming through on the left, and they will be able to expand as a structure, so that when the water like stop, they can switch back. So we started to play with a lot of the structure forms. You can see this is the experimental and also the numerical result. So this is just one of the example in my lab, which we play with this kind of structure in a desktop scale. And we think about once we develop those structures, we'll be able to actually either make them small, right? You think about the macrofluid, and we can think about design those in a very small scale, or maybe think about how that we can put it in a river channel. So this is something that I'm thinking about recently. So with that, this is just some of my recent work published within the last 2 years. And I say that I moved back to China about last year from Ohio State. So I currently in Guangzhou, very close to Hong Kong. So hopefully when the coronavirus ends, we'll be able to travel, and maybe all of you will be able to visit us in China. And so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nan, for a great presentation, very interesting research. Any questions for Lan or discussions?
Hey, Nan, may I have a question? I think you just mentioned that there's a lot of the forms, to consider to select. Your group trying to apply the machine learning, I think, to select, I think, more reasonable the form. Do you think, you can give us more, a little bit more information? I know the time is kind of limited, right? And there's some information that you might have to.
So, so I started interesting about this machine learning things because I have some background early on this neural network, deep neural network, some of those. So basically right now in the computational material science, there's a new area known as computational material science, which basically people use machine learning for two major purposes. One is just helping us to accelerate the prediction of the mechanical properties, right? So we give them a form so they'll be able to predict one. That's a very common things. And then the inverse problem, which is the second, is if we give them a target property or like target performance, how that we can generate structure forms or the geometric forms. That's actually even more challenging. So this is a little bit similar like topology optimization, but I think these two things can be combined together to help us to get more.
I see.
And so I think, but they have a different purpose. But right now, from what I'm seeing, the topology is still very good for probably most of us is within the structural engineering background. So the topology is still a very good approach in that case. Machine learning right now is still good for the problem at small scale and in probably material scales. Otherwise, if you think about my result on the very small lattice, even that a small like 4x4 or 6x6 cell, they already have more than 100,000 possibilities. So it's actually, if you think about it, if we increase the domain as a structures, is very challenging. So this problem I'm thinking about actually to go combine the topology and also the machine learning to accelerate those structure design for in the future. Yeah, thank you, Ray.
All right, thank you.
Great discussion. So we're going to move on to the next presentation. The next up will be Professor Yu from Case Western University. And Bill, if when you're ready, you can share your screen. Start whenever you're ready.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So I'm just also trying to share some of our work involving Bioinspired. So the work is done by one of my former PhD students, Jia Le, who currently works as associate professor at Hebei University of Technology. the work we did is essentially driving by how to improve energy production for wind from the wind. Then I say there may be some opportunities also. Like this is my brief outline. So essentially, with a strong interest in the renewable energy, so wind energy has been undergo pretty rapid development with a pace about 6% every year. So essentially, particularly for the new administration, maybe the renewable energy will be a bigger portfolio for overall energy source. So from the wind energy development aspects, it is speeded pretty fast and also evolved from the on-land wind farm to the offshore wind farm. Actually, like space-wise, it's kind of unsatisfactory for Ohio area because there have been discussion about offshore wind in Lake Erie for over 10 years, but no action have been taken for the construction yet. So that's kind of, to a certain extent, a little bit disappointing. And on our campus and also in downtown Cleveland, we saw this kind of utility scale wind turbines developed for generous, like to power small buildings or consumer load. So one of the issue, like essentially, like these kind of wind turbines are not located at the best siting for wind production. So my group have been looking into how do we harvest more energy by make the wind turbine blade to be dynamic. So essentially, so we explored, for example, extensible blade, like a telescope blade, which allow to utilize more wind energy at low wind speed at non-ideal siting. For this one, we're looking into this presentation primarily to try to describe the aspect about bioinspired, because how to improve energy production efficiency. There's a lot of things we can learn from biology system, like dendricle in the shark. They have this cutting edge compared with conventional wind turbine blade. They're not smooth one. Actually, it turns out they helped to disturb the flow field. Actually, generates a favorable condition that reduces drag. That's allowed a shark and a lot of other aquatics to move very quickly in the water. So that's the inspiration source. So we just try to implement this concept to see what's the advantage. So instead we try to use dendricle, the cutting edge in the shark into wind turbine blade design. So what we did was we just try to analyze different design, like in terms of we define the wavelength, amplitude to generate similar features in the cutting edge to see how it would benefit wind energy production. So we try to combine to simulation and also for wind tunnel testing to evaluate the performance. So this actual blade was produced by designing this cutting edge into the blade and test into the wind tunnel. So before that, we started from building simulation model. So it's a computational model try to simulate the drag and lifting force acting on the blade. So instead we started with a lot of analysis. Actually, and then the goal is to analyze with different designs if there's a maybe optimal one that gives the best performance. That's our setting goal. For the simulation model, because we're definitely not expert in fluid mechanics, I say Professor Zheng and also maybe other colleagues maybe potentially have opportunity to collaborate. So we use established software to simulate the flow, utilize published data in the well control department to ensure our simulation results is reliable before we extend to this special design blade. So this is a standard case published in the literature. We did a simulation and then we extend that one to the Bioinspired design, simulates with the response. So this is just some of the example result. And what we from like essentially when for this simulation case, I think that's like this comparison. If we have a single blade located inside the wind tunnel, that's the departmental data. And simulate this is we have our simulation result, which is matched reasonably well. So instead that gives us the settings we use for simulation that allow to predict the more complex blade design. So maybe I bypass some of this. So with the calibrated model, we then extend that one to a different boundary condition with this bio-inspired features. And then turns out, like in terms of lift to drag ratio, for all the bio-inspired compared with a baseline smooth blade, and all this bio-inspired blade has an improvement in the drag lift ratio, which means for energy production, they help to produce more energy but reduce the amount of drag force acting on the blade. So which is kind of beneficial. And then this is a different wind. So these two plots in summarize our simulation result with all these different design features. So this is the improvements over the the baseline. So essentially, what all have is improvements from the bio-inspired feature. The extensive improvements also related to the attack angle, how the wind cut into, how the blade cut into the wind, which can be modulated as well during the wind turbine operation. We then use this small scale wind tunnel to test its performance. So this is by collaboration with a colleague in ASCE department. They built this wind tunnel, had a good control algorithm built in. So it's different from turbine like a blade model without any control. Actually, they have a control algorithm built into the operation. So that's allowed to control the operation to emulate the actual in-service condition. And then we were able to get some data from that testing. So we use a 3D printer to produce the wind turbine blade, which this technology definitely helps to implement that bio-inspired feature with a standard foil wind turbine for this purpose. So this is some some printed result, with smooth blade versus bio-inspired features. So these are all this the test case we ran. And then turns out, so essentially, with the turbine blend test, we can so find out the performance parameters. One of the performance parameters is the rotation speed, linear speed of the blade tip versus the wind speed ratio. That is one of the parameter design determine the performance condition of blade wind turbine blade. We first validated that one with the standard blade, which they have this theoretical curve, which matched pretty well. And what we then did was compare with different bio-inspired blade. This one is a reference blade, standard blade. While with bio-inspired feature, what we found is typically, remember the wind turbine blade in the operation try to work in the best condition. They then adjust the rotation speed so that they reach the optimal output. Essentially, this one is the performance factor here. With regular blade, if the operation, when rotation speed deviates from the optimal, we have a much larger, pretty faster drop in the outcome production output. While with bio-inspired feature, the curve is first a little bit higher, high output. The other is flatter, which means there's more resilient to non-ideal working condition. So that's just make less demanding on control, adjustment, rotation speed. So this is applicable for all these blade features. So which is kind of encouraging from the operational aspect. So so in terms of the output efficiency, there's a decent improvement in efficiency compared with the bio-inspired feature. The other thing is the time process. It generates a wind speed process and see what's the total energy output by different blade. So essentially, the red one is the baseline for all these different bio-inspired features and all different cases. The blue curve, which is output by the bio-inspired blade, they are all consistently higher with higher output compared with the baseline blade. And this baseline blade, maybe I want to point out, is the best design. Is by expert in the wind turbine blade design. It's our colleague in ASCE who was known for wind turbine blade design. Actually, we recruited him from European country, from Europe, to lead our wind energy effort. So this is the best blade he come up with from his design. So this is the red line, and the blue curve with bioinspired feature added to that the best design blade. We still see a decent, pretty appreciable improvement in terms of energy output. So essentially, that's maybe some observation with this short period, like 200 seconds of wind fluctuation process. We say for all these cases have higher energy output. So yeah, maybe that's my quick observation. So essentially, adding the bioinspired feature into the blade structure helps improve the performance. And for manufacturing-wise, it's challenging. About blade production is actually challenging, but 3D printing potentially provide a good way to solve this kind of issue. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Great presentation. Any questions and discussion for Bill?
I can ask a quick question. So I think the results are quite interesting. So when you conducted the wind tunnel experiments, right? So so what is the inflow? Is like just a very uniform inflow? Is there any control of like the turbulence level, the boundary layer kind of profile, you know, things like that? Because that's like more wind turbine is subject to, right? So in the field, right?
Yeah, for this case, like the incoming wind was processed to be as uniform as possible. There's some, because the size of that wind tunnel we use for the testing is pretty small. I think that like it's a square shape with one side maybe around 60 centimeters. And because the whole wind tunnel fits in one room, so it's space-wise pretty limited. I think my colleague advocate the media feature is because he's an expert in wind turbine control. So he, with this wind tunnel setup, the monitoring system he developed have the control algorithm, like with variable load, adjust the rotation speed, so to make this work best in the best working condition with the best energy output. So this is not like just let wind turbine blades rotate based on the wind speed alone.
Yeah. So comment. Well, you know, I have a comment about that. So if you think of the power curve for a wind turbine produced by the manufacturer, usually is obtained at a kind of, you know, boundary layer type wind. So that's something maybe you could consider, you know, in the future, right? Yeah, so to test out the performance in that kind of wind, because the structure really, or airfoil performance is highly associated with what kind of flow condition.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's one good point. Yeah, actually, wind turbine blade, they also have this rated performance curve. Actually, we also in another study we actually analyzed the actual performance curve. Because, for example, on our campus, we have data connected about wind speed distribution, and energy output. If we utilize it directly link the wind speed versus output, energy output, we can produce the actual like a production curve for the blade. We do see some difference between the factory rated curve. Yeah. Actually, we utilize another analysis. We utilize that one to provide more maybe accurate prediction for wind energy, like based on weather forecast, to predict wind energy outcome, maybe like 24 days ahead of time, something.
Okay.
Well, Bill, I think Wee's point about using boundary layer wind tunnel testing is a great idea. But I think yours is a great idea too, and a great example of a bio-inspired structure. So thank you very much. You're doing great work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to move on to the next presentation. Will be presented by Professor Zhiliang Tao from Arizona State University. And Zhiliang, if you can share your screen and start whenever you're ready.
Can you see the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hi again. Yeah, you can tell how much pressure do I have when I have to present after my advisor. Okay. Anyways, so today I will share a little bit about Bioinspired self-burning mechanism. So I didn't put the robot there because we are still a long way to go, although we have some prototypes which can burn, but I think currently we are focusing on this, the mechanism. Okay, so first, what is biogeotechnics and what is CBBG? So as some of you may know, CBBG is an engineering research center supported by NSF. And we study, we are interested in how does nature kind of do geotechnical engineering. And also we have two phases. We finished the first phase in 2015. Now we are in the second phase. And it includes 4 universities. So ASU is the lead. And then we have UC Davis, Georgia Tech, and the New Mexico State as the partner universities. So we also have 4 research thrusts. So all of them are focusing on geotechnical engineering. So one is hazard mitigation. So the second one is environmental protection. And then we have construction and also subsurface excavation. So we also have a network of industry partners. So far we recruited about 30 industry partners. And also it involves 40 plus senior investigators, myself included. And we are working on about 80 core projects, although some of them actually have sunsetted already. So I don't think we have a official definition of biogeotechnics, but this is our version. Okay, so learning from nature and harnessing natural biological processes to transform the engineering of geotechnical systems to mitigate risks and address challenges associated with urbanization, global climate change, and the use of natural resources. As you can see, it's a little bit weak, but we like this way because we don't want to limit ourselves in a particular application or particular bioinspiration. But you also see that we have 2 Bs in the center. So the first B is actually bio-mediated. So it actually uses natural processes and products directly. We also have Bioinspired branch, so which use natural processes or products as inspiration, but we doesn't necessarily use biological materials or biological organisms in the design directly. So at the very beginning, bio-mediated geotechnics actually lead the field. As you can see in this overview here, so mainly it involves the generation of biomineralization, biofumes, or biogas to mediate the properties of these geomaterials, like mechanical properties and also hydraulic properties. And Bioinspired geotechnics is more recent. This overview figure actually shows what are the projects we are working on. So these are some examples. So for example, on column B here, so there are studies inspired by the skin of snakes. So you have this so-called anisotropic surface, and you can actually introduce this surface into the interface between a structure and a geomaterial so that you can achieve beneficial properties. Like you can have a pile which have a snake skin inspired surfaces, so it's easier to penetrate, but it's harder to be pulled out. So myself is working on the 3rd column here, which we call self-burning probes or self-burning mechanisms and robotics. So basically, so we learn from nature and to see how they move underground and then apply this in the field. And the last column is more structural, but unfortunately I'm not much involved in this. It's more like an underground structure. So it's root-inspired anchorage systems. So a group of researchers in Georgia Tech and UC Davis they are looking at the structure of the root system and then want to bring this idea to traditional foundation engineering. So today I will tell a little bit about the big picture of Bioinspired self-burn mechanisms and robotics. So actually, this project is driven by curiosity initially. So I think there are a lot of organisms living underground, and they a common feature, some common features of these organisms are they are motile, which means they move by themselves, and they achieve this by changing their body shapes, and they can also change directions when they burrow, and they tend to have very high efficiency. But we also have a lot of penetration phenomena in geotech. So for example, we have a lot of tools to help us to characterize the soil, mainly using penetration phenomena. And we also install the piles or anchors using these penetration phenomena. But common features are they are actinally driven, and the shapes of these structures are normally fixed. And also the moving direction is more unidirectional, and also is relatively low efficient. So my goal, the overarching goal of our research is actually to have a underground self-burn robot network. Okay, so it sounds like a scientific fiction, but we are actually approaching this goal closer and closer every day. So the idea is we can have some small scale self-burn robots which can carry sensors or which can serve as sensors by itself and conduct a wireless communication system. So it can be used for in situ testing and investigation, so that you are not limited to one direction, and also you are not limited to one spot when you deploy a robot. And it can be used for surveillance, reconnaissance, search and rescue, precision agriculture, and also extraterrestrial exploration. So in this talk, I only cover one aspect of these mechanisms and robots, which is after a robot or organism dig from A to B, then how it go back. So these have some application potentials because you want your robot to go back for maybe maintenance purposes, right? So for recharging, software update or hardware update, data retrieval, and in some cases, recycling. We study this because there are a lot of studies about downward penetration or downward burrowing or horizontal burrowing, but seldom people talk about upward burrowing. So we thought maybe we can learn from other animals, right? So other modes of locomotion like crawling or flying or swimming or so on and so forth. And after we read these literatures, we found, okay, they are actually called reverse locomotion, right? So you have forward locomotion and then you have reverse locomotion. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, actually, most organisms actually use the same locomotion strategy, but only change the posture, body posture, or the direction of the locomotion to achieve this reverse locomotion. So this applies to swimming as well, and also some burrowing organisms. But what we are interested in is a clam called razor clam. They are very fast burrower, and it's very hard to catch them. If you had a chance to walk along the beach and if you want to harvest them, it's very hard. So you have to use some tricks like give it a little bit salt on the top so they can actually go up very fast. But 50 years ago, actually, biologists actually studied how they burrow downward. Okay, so it's a very delicate or elegant process. So it involves the motions of the anchor or the shell, as well as the foot. So it's a 5-step processes. So basically, it opens up the shell first to anchor the body, to serve as the top anchor, and then they extend the tip of the foot So after that, they just close the shell so that the body fluid is pushed to the distal end of the foot. So the foot dilates to serve as the bottom anchor. So with that bottom anchor and shrink the body, so it's easy to drag this shell structure down. So this process is repeated, but you can see it's a pretty complex process. And we're interested in how they actually can burrow upward. So of course we can have some hypothesis, right? So maybe they follow one of these passes. So the first pass may be the smooth turn. Okay, so they always go forward. Okay, but generally change the direction so that they eventually they can resurface, or they make sharp turns. And you can imagine how hard would that be, right? So in soil, there are a lot of resistance and the limited space. So it's very hard to have that sharp turn. So another one is you don't turn at all, right? So you have that reverse locomotion. Okay, so you burrow backward. So to find out, we did some biological observations. So this video actually shows how they burrow downward. So they erect their body and then they just process that 5-step process repeatedly. Yeah. And you can see actually the soil actually moved quite a lot during this penetration process. And then we also observed how they burrow upward. So this is the upward burrowing process. As you can see, they almost jump. Okay, so it's a quite different process. And then we actually did more tests in different types of soils and different reservoir climbs. So the general feature are, so these two figures actually plot the burrowing curves. The horizontal axis and the vertical axis are the X and Y position. And these curves is just denotes the trajectory of these organisms. And then to denote the speed, we plot the right-hand side curve. So you have time on the horizontal axis, and then the burn distance on the vertical. Okay, so all these upper, okay, so greater than 0 curves are actually the upward burrowing process. You can see it's much faster and it takes much fewer cycles, okay, than the downward burrowing processes. So this is our hypothesis. So when we already covered this downward burrowing process, so it can be illustrated in this figure. But for upward process, we think you don't need a shell at all. Okay, so you just extend or contract the foot. Okay, so it's much simpler process and is resulting in a faster speed. And to test this hypothesis, we actually built a simplest or minimalist soft robot. So basically the soft robot are based on the natural hydrostatic skeletons. Okay, so it's driven by fluid pressure, and also it's the shape changing is limited by these inextensible fibers like the muscle fibers. So we did a few kind of prototypes like the traditional McCabe. So when you inject pressure, so it's the expand in increase in diameter, or one segment extension, or you can have multiple segments, and you can also have bending, two-way bending plus extension type of modes. But to test our hypothesis about upward burrowing, we only need one segment extension model. So we this is a setup we did to test it out. So basically you have a soil chamber here, and we first embed the soft robot downward, and then we just inject pressure into it. And this is the testing results. So we found that actually the burrowing out speed is affected by the relative density, which is denotes the packing or the density of the soil, and also the accretion strategy, like the period of inflation and deflation, and so on and so forth, and also the the maximum pressure, and also the saturation of this soil. So my background is actually geotech, so we are interested in how they actually interact with soil. So we visualize the soil fields. So this is a short video to show it's actually a DIC layer on top of this original video. So this shows the velocity of the pixels representing the soil particles. And then that may be too dark to see on your side, but here we extracted some key moments. So you can see the high, the brighter actually colors represents the higher movement velocity. So actually during this process, although it seems very straightforward process, just extension and the contraction, but the behavior of the soil surrounding is actually quite complex. So we also build analytical model. So based on this elasticity of this soft chamber and also the soil properties, like the end bearing capacity as well as side friction. So we actually captured the major trains as well as very well in terms of the magnitudes. Okay, so but I think the most thing I want to share is actually this part. Okay, so what we can learn from this. So studying boring in soil is more like swimming in a very sticky liquid. This kind of liquid it can be described as a low Reynolds number fluid. So we all know that the fluid is actually controlled by this Navier-Stokes law. And if there's, if the Reynolds number is very, very small, say much smaller than 1, then some terms in this Navier-Stokes equation actually cancel out or is dropped out, right? So they are 0, so which means time doesn't matter anymore, okay? And the pattern, which means the pattern of motion is the same, whether slow or fast, whether forward or backward in time. This actually is termed as the so-called scallop theorem. So which means if you only have 1 degree of freedom, okay, like in this, the hinge of this scallop shell. So if you only can do 1 type of motion, okay, 1 degree of motion. So, and if the motion is periodic, which means you open it up and then close. So if this occurs in a low Reynolds number environment, you will not go anywhere because you cannot coast anymore, right? Not like in water, so you cannot coast anymore. So the amount of advancement in one opening process is exactly the same, but reversing direction comparing to when you close the shell. Okay, so it can also be replicated by this crawling, right? So if you only have extension and contraction, which is actually 1 degree of freedom motion, if you just place these robots on top of the desk, it will not go anywhere. Okay, to break this symmetry or to generate net translation, so you have to break the symmetry. Okay, so either you have another degree of freedom, like this 3-link swimmer, okay, or you change the boundary conditions periodically. But why, in our case, so soil, the upward boring process of the riser climbs actually rely on 1 degree reciprocating motion, yet it actually have net translational movement. So it actually relates to the soil property. Okay, so we know that with the depth increases, so the stress level increases, the strength increases, and also the failure modes of the soil differences. Okay, so actually we conclude that the inherent material of the stress anisotropy breaks the symmetry needed for upward boring. So another implication is, another reason is actually the flowability of the soil is also crucial. Okay, so if you have a clay, so probably this doesn't work as well as in dry sand, because after these bottom end of the robot goes up or contracts, so it generates a cavity. So this cavity will be filled with flowable sand to re-establish a starting point for the next cycle. So if this process doesn't exist, so it's hard to re-establish the base to leverage for the next cycle. Okay. So anyways, so that's our current work, previous work, and currently we are looking at other types of inspirations from other animals and organisms, and even plants and seeds, to see what are the best strategies in what kind of working environments. And we are also collaborating with mechanical engineers in, at ASU, and we are designing several different types of downward horizontal boring robots. Okay, so I think that's all. Sorry for being long, and at least I want to thank the funding agencies and also the hardworking students, as well as Professor Dale Levitt at Roger Williams University, who provided these research grants for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. So for the interest of time, we will probably skip the question portion, and I will include everyone's contact in my minutes, so that if you are interested in discussing more, you can contact on an individual basis. So the next presentation up will be from Professor Wei Zhang from Cleveland State University. So Julian, if you could unshare the screen real quick.
Sure.
Great.
Okay, I'm sorry for being.
It's okay. So Wei, if you like to share your screen, and can start when you are ready.
All right, guys, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll try to be short to save time. Okay, so again, my name is Wei Zhang, based in Cleveland State University. I want to share some work towards resilience and sustainability by the path of bioinspiration and biomimicry. So my background is in, my bachelor's degree actually is in civil and environmental engineering, but my PhD is in thermal fluids area. So my current research covers resilient civil structures in extreme wind events like hurricanes and tornadoes. Last year we heard derecho, that's another kind of strong wind events. Wind energy optimization modeling. So there's some kind of common interest with Bill. So it'll be great to talk that later. I'm interested in flow control for wind resilience and sustainability using biomimicry approach. So to give you some ideas about my work, so I worked on the aerodynamics of wind turbine, either a single turbine or a wind farm layout. So this is a picture taken of a model wind farm in a large wind tunnel. So we have this wind farm in operation so that we can see how flow and the heat transport will be affected by the wind farm. I'm also working on the complex terrain effects on the wind and turbine performance. So meanwhile, I'm looking at another side of the wind. So when you have strong wind, that causes natural hazard, right? So we have a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes in the United States. So I have worked on lab simulated tornadoes, flows as this with large vortices containing several more small vortices, creating very strong wind speed and low pressures. So we're looking at with a structure model, so what what parts are most vulnerable in this kind of strong wind, so that we can design safer buildings which can resist even strong wind. So as an experimentalist, I use scaled model and modern measurement techniques like particle imaging velocimetry for flow to look at flow structure or wind structure interaction. Of course, biomimicry is one of the design tool or innovation tool. So talking about wind energy, we can look at the flow physics at different scales. So if you focus on 1 millimeter to 1 meter scale, you basically are considering the 2D airfoil aerodynamics under the low wind conditions and corresponding to low Reynolds number, laminar to transition could happen. So this is still a gray area that no established theory can predict the flow behavior here. So we can study the laminar to turbulence transition, which is important for noise control and load mitigation. When you move on to 10 meter and 100 meter scale, you're looking at the rotor. So this is the CFD results from my collaborator showing that the tip vortices generated by in operation, and then they were transported downstream. So these tip vortices and helicoidal trajectory indicated the strong turbulent intensity downwind. And imagine that you have a large wind farm. So it's very important to consider this kind of disturbed flow effects on the downstream wind turbine. And also these tip vortices are important to related with noise, right? So people complained about, there's some noise from the wind turbine. I don't want to have one in my backyard. So this is about the these tip vortices. Then moving on to even larger scale, 10,000 meter and 1,000 meter and 10,000 meter, you are looking at wind farms. So again, this is a wind turbine. So wind farm simulation experiment in a large boundary layer wind tunnel, and we have the heat transport. We have heat flux sensors to look at how temperature could be varied by large wind farm operation, and correspondingly, other people have run the CFD to look at the perimeter, effects. So currently, I'm working on the complex terrain effects. How wind will be modified by complex terrain, because in reality, wind farms are sometimes built on a site with mountains, with trees and grass, and even the water body around. So how these kind of complex feature of Earth will affect wind and subsequently affect the performance of wind turbine, right? So we have some research done using sinusoidal hill in the wind tunnel and look at the separation flow and the turbulence field. And my collaborator at the University of Iowa look at how trees, a patch of trees affect the flow here. So based in Cleveland, as Jun Lian mentioned, well, probably not Jun Lian, but Bill mentioned, we are interested in freshwater wind energy development. So there's a very special condition here, right? So you have a lot of buildings of different sizes here, and you have large water bodies. So how wind will be, how could you predict wind very accurately in this very complex situation? So wind assessment is an important step to move to ensure the wind farm or wind turbine performance. So now I want to switch the gear to talk about wind hazard. So that's another phase of wind. So this is a map you can actually see from NOAA's website, just to show you that last year, 2020, how many billion-dollar weather and climate disasters happened in the United States. And from the statistics, 70 to 80% of the natural hazard caused economic losses is from wind-related hazard and water-related hazards. Usually strong wind will bring in also a lot of rains, right? So in hurricanes and tornadoes. And for the insured losses, more than 80% is from the wind alone, and more than 90% is from the wind combined with water. So these hazards are definitely the problems we need to solve. Again, coming back to this map, you can see almost every month last year. So you have a major hurricane event in the coastal area. And in the middle, in the Midwest of the United States, we have also, severe weather, right? So the one happened in August 10th, the Rachel actually occurred, caused a lot of damage in Iowa. So my friend told me that his roof was got, severe damaged, and then pushed to the east and reaching Ohio. So if you look at more statistics from NOAA's website to count how many such events happen, so you can see on average from 1980 to today to this year. So on average, there are 7 events happen, but last year 2020 sets a new record, 22 events. Right, the second highest is in 2011. Then counting about the economic losses, in terms of billions of dollars. So you can see that 2017 is the most expensive year in terms of natural hazard cost or cost economic losses. So if you may recall that there are a series of hurricanes simultaneously hitting the coastal area, right? So there's a Hurricane Harvey, Maria, and Irma. So they are of category 4 or 5, causing a lot of damage. And the second highest is 2005, associated with Hurricane Katrina. So we have to think of, what are the most important, or what kind of structures are being damaged the mostly, right? From the post-survey by FEMA, so we actually learned that low-rise buildings, residential, commercial buildings less than 35 meters are mostly damaged because they are not, so they are designed and built following ASCE provisions. So you can see here, example of convention center in the Philippines. So during Typhoon Haiyan, so only a sidewall still remains, other parts are all damaged. So if you look at different components, so the roof and the windows are of the first are mostly damaged, including roof cover, roof structure, roof deck failure, and then the surface, cladding and component damage, so which could initiate the overall building collapse. And last but not least, the wind-induced debris. So the broken parts can fly away to hit the wall or buildings in the neighborhood, so which is called missile impact. So some pictures showing the roof damage. So as an engineer, we ask ourselves, how can we reduce and minimize wind-induced damages? So of course, we are the group interested in wind, bioinspiration and biomimicry, right? So here are just some examples. So for me, I'm really interested in plants because they are subject to certain wind condition and they cannot escape, right? So as an animal, they may escape from a certain situation, but for a plant, they have to adapt or they have to evolve in a certain smart ways to handle that condition, right? So there are some people working on this saguaro cactus in smart circular cylinder. I know this big cactus is in probably Arizona, right? So maybe Julian could actually take some picture there. Also look at that if you're interested in. And other people in coastal area look at the mangrove root system, which can be used to inspire some engineering design for wind and wave attenuation. So for me, I'm particularly interested in the fractal, so which is a structure repeated at different scales. You can actually see it in river network, trees, clouds, and some of the plants. But for me, my approach is to even go to simpler fractal structure as these grid, cross grid, I grid, and square grid. So these grid have been studied by many people as flow control devices. So the reason is that these simple grids can be well categorized by just the 4 or 5 parameters. So if you want to optimize them, there's a way to comprehensively study them. So they have been used for turbulence enhancement, noise reduction, energy redistribution. So there's some literatures if you are interested in, you could read. So in our group, I have a student who created this 2D fractal fence using cross grid, and then we compared with this regular non-fractal fence. So it's a wind or snow fence to try to reduce the wind speed. Another work we compared to is this 1D fractal fence by Keylock, based in UK. So have wind tunnel experiments on the flow structure affected by that, and we compared how effective the shelter effects could be from different wind fans. So it turned out our, by using this cross grid, this 2D fractal fence, we didn't really tune any parameter, already showing very promising results. So the current project I'm working on, funded actually early last year. So it's to use Bioinspired flow control for wind resilience. So we're looking at low-rise building under hurricane kind of type wind, very strong wind. So we want to see how the rooftop vortices form at this really high Reynolds number. That's the first part of the project. And then we want to come up this multi-scale fractal parapets to install on the roof to see if we can break down these vortices or not. So that's hypothesis, right? So we want to really break down or suppress these vortices so that we have a safe roof. So I have another ongoing project is a education program, BioFlow International Research Experience for Students. So through collaboration with colleagues at the University of Akron and also my friend actually at Case Western. So we'll bring students to South Korea. Professor Lee is my collaborator for long term. So he has a BioFlow, biomimic research center. So we bring students there to do like summer research for 3 years. So some sample projects here, like the vertical type wind turbine using a seal whisker inspired blade, fractal parapets for vortex suppression, spider ballooning, and leaf shift heat transfer devices. So here are some sample projects. Actually, we cannot do the project this year, but we will actively hire students to support them, with stipend, with travel funds, to send them to South Korea to do this exciting research. US faculty will remotely mentor them. So if you guys are interested in, or you want to pass the information to your students, I'll send you the details. Of course, I want to acknowledge my students, collaborators, and funding agencies. So again, I am very happy to see you guys here. So I think there's a large space we can collaborate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Wei. Great presentation. And again, I apologize that we probably would move along without the question and answer. And I will provide the contact information for everyone to connect again. So the next presentation will be from Professor Ray Liu and Professor Linda from Kent State University. And you can share your screen and start when you are ready.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. I think I will make my our presentations short within the 10 minutes, the limits. So the Lindas will be here to present, I think, the knitting technique and which was utilized, adopted for our project. Let me share my screen pretty quick. Let me do this. I'm pretty quick. I think, you know, my research, I think, got inspired by the tensegrity structures. So it's highly efficient. There's two elements, members in compressions like the struts and the members in tensions like the cables. We have learned a lot, I think, from the tensegrity. My research, I think, the three parts to look at how to design for the resilient, adaptable structures. The better prevalence is one of the project we are working on. The project led by Professor Diane Davis-Cover, and who is an architect, and contributed by the Professors Linda McDaniel, the fashion designer and CNC knitter. I'm a structural engineer to contribute to the structural performance of the pavilion. Also, I do the research trying to look at and how we can use computers, I think, to augment all the designers' capacities in the design and fabrication, and consider some the creative way for us to run the constructions as well. And here's one proceedings we finished in December 2019. To use ASCE to kind of full-scale construction. And I look at all the dredge. We took the dredge from the Lake Erie, from the Cuyahoga River and the Maumee River, and to run some quite interesting, I think, the design as well, to develop, I think, the 3D printed the bricks. Here's the team. Today, I think we will focus on, I think, all the better providing the project, and it's led by Professor Diane Davis-Cover, and who is an architect. And here's the team. Here's also the Linda's kind of significant, I think, you know, the contributor and the researchers, the lead, the investigator of the project as well. So, so as I mentioned, you know, the possibilities so that I think, you know, there's pretty quick, I think all the tetrahedrons are connected by the fabric, you know, the designs inspired by the spine of the human and also the animals as well. And apparently, I think, you know, the performance of the structures is super interesting. So here is a quick, I think, demonstrations. I think one lesson we learned is, if we give, I think, excitations to the system, and we can find out, I think, the entire structures will respond to the external forces. And then, I think, eventually the structure systems will become static and to get the final equilibrium condition. Oh, sorry about that. I think, you know, give me 1 second. The next slide. Okay, something, let me jump it here. Here is kind of our the starting model, and so as mentioned, you know, the tensegrity tension compressions. We do have tetrahedrons in compression, and then the, you know, the fabric is in tension. And here's, I think, all the fabrics knitted by the Linda, and use the CNC machines. Next couple slides, I will invite, I think, the Linda's talking about, I think, the knitting for the fabric. So Linda.
There, unmute. So yeah, here you can see it knitting on the knitting machine. It just, and it's an industrial knitting machine that we have, and we program to knit these textiles. And so, yeah, it's a range of different sizes of tetrahedrons, as you might have seen in the previous slides. And so it's a 7-field intarsia, really meaning there are different fields and different yarn carriers that knits different types of structures across the piece. The smallest piece had 160 stitches and in width and 282 stitches in height. And the largest piece, 384 by 752 stitches in size. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see the different types of structures. And so to connect to the tetrahedron at the bottom, we have a open tubular knit stitch. So you can see in the picture of the knitted structure how the GFRP rods can slide through to hold the tetrahedron shape on. And so in the main portion where you see kind of the polka dot pattern is a more open structure. It's a tubular pointelle, which means it's got 2 layers, but we wanted it to be open as well. And so hence the little openings in the textile. But the tubular fabric is double layered and gives a little bit more structure to be able to hold the piece. You can see 2 green little segments on each side. Those are pockets where it once again connects to the tetrahedron shapes. And then the kind of turquoise sections in the pattern are pockets as well, where the top of the tetrahedrons would go in. So each of the knitted shapes connected to 3 different tetrahedrons in order to form the chain that connects the whole piece together. So yes, here you can see the little pockets on the side and the pockets at the top where the tetrahedron would sleeve in. And then the long straps on each side are the buttonholes where we would chain and connect. And that's kind of how we controlled the size, and we're a little bit flexible in how long or what the form of the whole pavilion would take.
Sure. So Linda, I forgot to put some statistics in the presentation. Do you still remember how many different sizes of the fabric we knitted?
Yes. Yeah, we did have, I think, 22 different sizes of tetrahedron textile pieces, since they connected to different sizes in range. So we had 45 tetrahedrons total, and they ranged from size 12-inch up to 30 inches. So those would be the kind of the length of the legs in the tetrahedron. And then the textiles would combine them. And so there were a few more sizes of the textiles, but the incremental size change was 2 inches. So we did 12, 14, 16, and so on up to 30-inch in the tetrahedron shapes.
Yeah, another really interesting the fact is the entire structure is super lightweight, and we packed everything together and we shipped to Barcelona, Spain for the defense competitions. Actually, the project wins the kind of honorable mentions in the competitions of the ASCE, International Association for Shell Spatial Structures, and it's only weighs 14 pounds and altogether with fabric and the GFRP rods. So kind of interesting for us to consider this and how we can just run, I think, the simulation from finding, understand its structural performance. And apparently here, I think I'm not going to go to details. We applied we call it isogeometric analysis. There's one, the plugin from Harper, and we can run trying to integrate, I think, the finite element analysis in the NURB surface, and so it's kind of different from the traditional FEA, and we might have to base on the niche. But in order to get, I think, quick the results, we can rely on the NURB surface or the geometries to run the FEA. And here's the very quick the simulation results for the 2 tetrahedron, and to see, I think, the performance of the fabric. By the way, I think the tools developed by the researchers from the QS Technical University of Munich, and it's pretty convenient tool for us to run the simulation. So as mentioned, I think we do have the GFRP, the glass fiber reinforced plastic, and regarding for the construction, it's kind of interesting as well. Starting from the ring, and then we can adjust all the tensions in the rope and fabric, and then we can generate the different, I think, the geometry, the final topologies of the small pavilion. So that's kind of, which can help us understand the relationship between the form and the force. We ran some testing in order to better to simulate the process, and actually Professor Christian Caloni from the Case Western, and actually from the Department of Civil Engineering from the Bell's department helped us to run the testing, here are some of the testing results. And it's kind of interesting. I think it depends on the knitting pattern, and we can understand, I think, also mechanical behaviors. And for the fabric, we utilize actually in both directions. The fabric exhibits the similar behavior, mechanical behavior, and then based on the information, we can build that into the computers, trying to get the better performance. So here's the it's ongoing the project. Currently, we are working on the better prevalence 2.0. We call it the better plus plus, and hopefully we can get, I think, the pretty good results and pretty quick in the summer, and present the project in the future the conference. Here, so I just give all the acknowledgement to all the researchers and collaborators, I think, for the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray and Linda, for a great presentation. Very nice project, and we'll move on to the presentation from Austin on bio-inspired approaches in engineering education. So I think it's a very important topic.
Okay.
Austin, yeah, your screen is coming up.
Okay. Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Austin Dada. I'm a PhD student at the University of Colorado at Denver under Dr. Frederick Rutz, and I'm also a bridge engineer, as I stated earlier. I'm pretty early in my PhD studies here, so I don't have a specific topic, but I wanted to present just kind of a proposed curriculum for students who are learning this area of study. So as we're all aware, biology and structural engineering aren't very compatible in regards to the way that they're practiced and taught in the real world. In fact, Tom Knight, a scientist at MIT, pointed out that biologists and engineers are very different in the fact that engineers are more concerned with standardization and applicability in general, while biologists relish more complex concepts. So my immediate goal is to determine a curriculum study that would effectively give an engineer the tools that are necessary to study and apply biological concepts in the field of structural engineering and construction. So from my preliminary literature review, I've come up with the following emerging applications in the field of bioinspired structures. For the creation of new biomaterials or the use of existing biological materials in construction, I've studied the familiar concept of hierarchical structuring that you would find in nature. In the first photo, you can kind of see the comparison between the similar hierarchical structure of bone and bamboo on the bottom, followed by another photo of the hierarchical structure of silk. So just to move along, another application deals with just determining the properties of conventional construction materials. One example of this application will be the use of structural color, which is employed in butterfly wings and can be used to identify changes in strain and corresponding stress in construction materials due to their change in color. So these photos from the left to the right show the application of a film that creates an anti-reflective layer on a nickel coupon and a concrete treated with bacterium, which excretes calcium carbonate, effectively sealing microcracks. Hierarchical structuring can also occur at the macro scale, as seen in these two photos, where the bending moment distribution of a tree branch is shown, as well as the structural system of a frame on the right, also known as a diagrid, where a structural system similar to that of a tree trunk is employed for increased structural integrity. So I made a similar presentation last year where I kind of suggested these courses. And here are what's different from that presentation last year are the courses that I'm currently taking in the bioengineering field. Basically, you can see here cell and molecular biology for engineers. I've taken that course, and these other two courses, analytical methods for engineering analysis and 3D modeling for bioengineers, I have yet to take those courses, but I believe that all 3 of these courses would kind of help with my search for a topic. So since my I've taken cell and molecular biology for bioengineers, where the main focus of the course was to learn about cell function and biological systems in eukaryotic cells, where eukaryotic cells are just living organisms where the cell structure is higher than a fungus, basically, and up to, you know, animals like humans. And so although this course was designed for biomedical engineers and the development of diagnostics for the treatment of human disease, through some additional research and contemplation, I've determined that the course was really helpful in understanding prokaryotic cell function as well. So that would kind of lead to the cell function of bacteria. And of course, as many of us know, some bacteria can be used in self-healing concrete. So also some areas of tissue engineering were touched upon in this course, and that could be useful for the use of biomaterials in the built environment, in our actual built environment at a macro scale. So the analytical methods for engineering analysis course that I will be taking in the fall of this year is going to focus on mainly machine learning and data analysis. And some of you all have touched on this area as well. And so through my literature review, I believe that this course could offer insights into applying data and analytics to the structural health monitoring of structures. Maybe several monitoring devices could be placed at strategic points on a structure, and through algorithms that mimic the biological immune system shown in organisms and animals, the data collected from these monitoring devices could offer better solutions for retrofitting existing structures. And I'll also be taking a 3D modeling course designed for bioengineers, but I'm hoping that this course could help me to better represent other material types in computer models and how they perform and behave under environmental loads and stimuli. I believe that this will be useful in modeling structures that mimic the structural makeup of biological elements such as muscles and bones in an animal. So through the courses that I've already taken and have also planned, I hope to meld the various concepts of these courses into a method for analyzing structures from the perspective of nature and the concepts of bioinspiration, as well as modeling potential structures from newer biomaterials. So thank you all for that, for listening to my presentation and accommodating me here today. I wanted to make this as quick as possible. I'd also like to thank Dr. Rutz and Dr. Hussam, Hussam Mahmoud here in the presentation, listening as well. They're both very instrumental to me so far in helping me to determine a research topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Okay, and thank you everyone for coming today. And I will very briefly talk about some of our ongoing effort on the Bioinspired approach for building envelope or building enclosure design. So this is my main research area at the moment. The Bioinspired building envelopes are not exactly new. One of the more famous example was the ASCE building in Zimbabwe, which was built almost 30 years ago. So this idea was evolved from the structure of termite mounds, actually, how termites are building their mounds utilizing the distribution of thermal mass in their habitats to guide the airflow. So the building was built inspired by that approach by strategically distribute the thermal mass in the building envelope system to generate this autogenerous updraft wind in the building envelope for self-cooling. So I will talk very quickly about some ongoing efforts that we're taking now to help the design of building envelope or enclosure system use bio-inspired approaches. So the first one is a simple but effective approach for the Voronoi tessellation. So Voronoi tessellation is a geometric pattern that widely discussed in nature. In the biological system, in their structuration of their cells, for example, or fiber packing, etc. So we find this pattern all over the place, from plant leaves to a dragonfly wings, the patterns of a turtle shell, etc. So mathematically, this is a very simple pattern. So basically, if we have a random set of generator point, we call in a domain, the bisecting lines, and we take aggregation of the bisecting lines, it will form a Voronoi pattern. So what's more interesting is something called a centroidal Voronoi tessellation. If we take those randomly generated Voronoi cell and calculate where the mass center of the cell is, in general, the mass center of those pattern cell will not be coincide with the generator point location. So if we basically use a approach to try to walk of the generator point towards its mass center, use an iterative approach, what people will find out is slowly through iteration, those generator points will walk towards match the pattern of the density function that we assign to this domain. So this is a very interesting phenomenon that people can utilize in an example of the design of a lightweight structure. As an example, we can use either stress intensity or stress gradients as the density function to drive the movement of those generator points of a Voronoi tessellation. So as a result of that, for example, we use the case of a femur bone as an example, is under any arbitrary stress or force field, those generator point is going to walk automatically towards where the stress concentration is going to take place. So we can actually use this method to design structures that is resilient to damages, for example. So I'll jump very quickly, and this is a very adaptive approach. We simply take the stress field that's analyzed by finite element, for example, as the input of this algorithm, that we can design structural patterns that's most effectively designed to adapt to this pattern. So taking this approach in envelope design, we basically take the same approach and apply them to a 2.5D or 3D space. While we find out what this approach can be useful for, it's not only we can design, for example, the structural system to support the facade panel based on the force or the shape of the enclosure system, or in some times that if we focus more on the thermal aspect instead of the mechanical or structural aspect, then we can actually use heat flux as an example, or temperature as the driving density function to do the computation, that the patterns that's automatically generated by this approach is going to give the a close to optimal distribution of the supporting grid for facade panels. So again, this is something that we are still exploring at the moment in designing different architectural systems or even service planning of infrastructure services. Another thing that I want to quickly talk through is something that we have recently ongoing. I always joke about it, is I had a dream since years ago, and I want to turn every building into a tree, right? So not only for the purpose of, for example, carbon sequestration, but also a lot of plants have very good temperature self-regulating behaviors, right? So a lot of that is attributed to the transpiration process Basically, that's the water transport phenomenon within most vascular plants. So there has been effort that's been ongoing for years now, try to create, we call it a synthetic tree, which mimic the behavior of how the water is uptake from the root system going through the trunk of a vascular plant, for example, and going to the leaf into evaporation. So one of the things that, well, there are a few factors that we find are critical in this process. One is the material. So in the venation system of a vascular plant, there's a material called xenon. So xenon is a nanoporous material that is somewhat structurally like a hydrogel that can absorb and transport water. But by itself, we find it's not enough by capillary effect to transport water effectively for example, passive cooling of the building or support life organism on building surfaces. That's something that we're working on now. So another important factor that we're digging into is the geometry, basically how the venation systems are distributing and transporting water. So there has been algorithms that we have been working to mimic the generation of the vein in plant leaves. That's called the venation algorithm. So taking this, we basically in our lab created somewhat an artificial leaf. We don't have a synthetic tree just yet. That's a long way to go, but we created an artificial leaf, utilized a material as called a fly ash cenosphere, which is basically the hollow part from fly ash. And we come up with an approach to develop an inorganic foam at very low cost, but has very interesting property in transport and store water in this particular case. So the microstructure, as you can see in those SEM images, somewhat mimic the behavior of the subsurface cellulars of plant leaves. So every of those round particles that we generate in those forms are hollow. So they have little holes on the surface of those particles. When water transport in, it can store water. And in the transpiration or evaporation process is slowly release water vapors into the environment. And on the spirit of creating a artificial tree leaf as the envelope panels as an example, we use the venation algorithm to generate veins that simulate the veins in a plant leaf, and we 3D printed those waxes, as those are actually paraffin wax, and we 3D printed, and we casted this material, which is a mixture of fly ash and minerals, into the mold. That we created envelope panels that has venations that integrate into them, and we put the hydrogel into those veins to basically simulate the behaviors of xenons in how they transport water. So this is a very recent experiment we have done. We have not published the result just yet. We are basically testing, running the behavior, the energy behavior, thermal transfer behavior of envelope panels in compare of a baseline concrete roofing as an example with a self-evaporating foam or the sensitive leaf that we created to test the cooling behaviors of this synthetic foam. I will not go into the details of the result, but it's very effective. On average, can drop the surface temperature of a building by more than 20 to 30 degrees, especially in summer daytimes. So I think I will stop here. Those are some other concepts that we are exploring in responsive building envelope in mimicking the behaviors of plants or animals' skin. But for the interest of time, I will stop right here from my presentation. And